Excellent, awesome. So, sorry about that. So my name is Mark Barlet. I'm the founder and the executive director of the AbleGamers Foundation. I presented at GDC 6 times. I actually need to update that because I just got back from GDC, South by Southwest, the White House, and countless other things. You can follow me on Twitter at Mark Barlet.
I'm Greg Haynes. I'm the lead user researcher here at AbleGamers. Born and bred in New York City. A ways off from where you are right now, but let's just say New York, solidarity, state love right there. I went to a school at Fordham University, studied psychology, and following that, I worked for almost 6 years at the New York State Psychiatric Institute, in pharmaceutical research of schizophrenia patients. And I moved to West Virginia to work with AbleGamers to work on the things that I'm going to be talking about with you today.
We're really privileged to be able to present this information, but it wouldn't happen without this great team. This is the team that helped build the APX stuff that we're going to present to you today. Dr. Power and Dr. Carnes are really our resident smarter people than us. Scholars and residents, stuff like that. And Jen Beeston did a lot of the research around the numbers and the data that we're going to share with you guys. So I want to start with telling you guys how I founded AbleGamers, because it's really important to understand this. So I am a person with disabilities. I'm a service-disabled veteran, which means that while active duty, I was injured in a way that allowed me to no longer have a military career. But that's not why I started AbleGamers. I started AbleGamers because my best friend from the 6th grade, well into my fact, we're still great friends today, was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. We used video games as a way to stay connected. I'm probably the oldest person in the room, and I'm not even in your room. But we used to play EverQuest together every Friday. Well, one Friday, my friend didn't log in, so I picked up the phone, and her husband answered the phone, and I could hear my best friend, Stephanie, crying in the background. And the reason why she was crying was because multiple sclerosis had decided that day that her mouse in hand wasn't going to work. And she was going to not ever be able to play games again. And games weren't about games to her. Games were about community, and games were about friendship and staying connected with her friends. She played EverQuest not because it was a great game, because it was a great friend. And so instead of gaming that night, I spent the evening trying to find a solution for her, trying to find the answer to the question, how do you play video games if you have a disability? And I wasn't really finding an answer. Given that I'm a technologist, I kind of felt at that moment that this was a calling. That because I was watching video games being taken away from somebody that I love, that there were probably other people out there that were going through the same thing. And I didn't want to live in that world. So that's how we founded AbleGamers. And this August will actually be 15 years old. So we want to do a little bit of a brag. Greg and I got our first game credit last year. Would you guys like to guess what game we were credited with?
Okami?
No.
That's a good guess.
So that was Will's guess all the way in the front there.
Any other guesses?
God of War? That's my guess.
That was a good guess, too.
It's a good guess. It has 3 names in it.
Grand Theft Auto?
Another popular one, but not quite.
So, Call of Duty. We got our very first game credit in Call of Duty, and we're super proud of it because I've personally helped probably 30 game titles be more accessible, and this is the first time I've ever gotten credit. I'm a little bitter.
Understandable.
It's also just amazing that we're legends and nobody can take this away from us now.
Well,
So typically speaking, accessible design has sort of been framed by how we think of interactive technologies, right? Technology is usually thought of as being successful based on whether or not it can complete a task. So if a piece of technology can complete a task, it's successful at what it can do. If it can't, then it's unsuccessful. If you go on Amazon.com and you're able to order, the t-shirt that you want to get, then that technology is successful. If there's a problem, if you can't see the text that's necessary to click on the shirt that you need to buy, then Amazon.com is not successful in that respect. This mentality is sort of shaped inclusive design and accessible design as early as the 1960s. So,
Tell me a little bit about this.
oh yeah, feel free. So when you look at games as interactive technologies, you don't really play a game to complete a task. I mean, when you think about the tasks that you may go through in a game, right? Moving a character around, jumping from a platform to another platform, eliminating enemies, those tasks aren't really why you play games. You play games for something more. So when I play Mass Effect, I play so that I can make some of the best friends I've ever made in a galaxy that is mine, but also isn't mine at the same time. So I can save the galaxy from alien invaders. I play Spider-Man so I can swing around my hometown and be a hero. And, ultimately, laugh at bad guys and make fun of bad guys. When I play Metal Gear Solid, I play because I can be a legendary hero taking on mechs that are 30 times my size. People are playing games because they want experiences. And providing accessibility in games is about removing barriers. It's about designers removing barriers in your game so that people can have the experiences they want to have, so people can have accessible player experiences. Historically, we've had little to push that forward until now.
So, AbleGamers took on a project of really understanding data, getting data, and we put out a call almost a year and a half ago.
Yeah, almost 2 now.
2 years ago, hoping for we wanted to start putting players with disabilities into a panel so that we could start understanding. I worked with people with disabilities for 15 years, but we didn't really have any hard data. So we put out a tweet. And we were expecting, our goal was to get 10 to 12 people to sign up. In the first week, we had 134 people sign up. What this told us was people with disabilities were itching to be able to share their experiences and share their knowledge to make the world more accessible. Right now, the player panel has over 450 people signed up. 397 have been active, and we've done over 15 projects. Some of these projects are with major companies who are now using data to make decisions.
So here's a look at some of the demographics and the breakdowns of the disabilities that we've seen in our player counts. Typically speaking, our players tend to have more than one disability. That's why these percentages don't add up to 100. But if you take a look at that about what we're showing right now, you see there's a huge amount of people that have physical mobility disabilities, such as upper limb and lower limb. We also have a good quarter of people, with mental health difficulties. We have 17% with learning disabilities. We have various disabilities included when it comes to vision. We have low vision and blind players combining for 18% of our demographic, and we have low hearing and deaf as well, combining for about 13%. So as you can tell, we have a lot of players with a bunch of different disabilities. So we asked these players what were some of the options that they typically using in their games, and what we found kind of surprised us a little bit. So to start off, let's talk about key remapping. So we had almost half of our players. So we said we have over 450. So if you look at it, 1 out of 2 of our players is essentially using key remapping. Now that kind of makes sense because there's a lot of mobility issues with our population, as you just saw. So key remapping sort of makes sense there. But a lot of people are also using subtitles, 40%. Now, if you think about the numbers we just shown, and you think about the visual disabilities, and the demographic, the sort of amount of people in our group that have that disability, 40% is a lot higher than, people that actually have, visual disabilities in our player count.
Yeah, the previous slide said that we had about 15% of people that you would think turn on subtitle. Subtitles. So they would turn it on. But 41% of people do it. So what did the data say? Well, interestingly enough, we know the answer. Women have a tendency to turn on subtitling more than men, even when there's nothing that would be in their makeup that would say subtitling is necessary. We found that people with learning disabilities oftentimes turned on subtitling because it gave them another layer of information so they can take it in. Our data even found that people who were learning English as a second language had a tendency to turn on subtitling because, again, they were looking for that additional layer of input.
Even when you look at coloring options at 20%, we have about 3% of our players that identify as being colorblind, yet 20% of them, 1 out of 5 of them, are using the coloring options. And when you look at that, you think about, okay, where could that be coming from? People with low vision, people with also mental health difficulties might need to better see contrast. They might have learning disabilities that require them to see things in the background and have them stand out more. So what this all tells us is that assuming that disabilities use specific options isn't the right way to go about it. We understand that there are people who, regardless of the disability identifiers, are using these options.
Preferences, almost. We thought traditionally of accessibility as we're doing this because we want to help this particular group. But the data was really showing that we're doing this because there's a group of people that prefer that as their information layer.
And then, you look at these software options and the assistive technology options that we highlight there in the upper right corner. We see a lot of our players are doing whatever it takes to play. They're using assistive technology. They're using software options. 63% of them are using software options. So they're adding things that supplement their experience that allow them to have the accessible experiences that they're seeking.
One of the things we asked is play style. Again, before we started doing this information, there was no one really looking at or talking to players with disabilities to understand. And we found this interesting. Of our players that we surveyed, 56% said that gaming was their primary hobby. 58 identified themselves as gamers. Hardcore gamers was much bigger than we thought it was, with at 38%. So that kind of broke down some of our own assumptions within the organization. A typical play session, 2 to 4 hours, was our biggest one. But 1 in 4 played over 5 hours a day. Now, I personally don't have 5 hours a day to play games. I wish I did. But we found this to be really interesting. What this data tells us is that a player with disabilities is really a fan, like a hardcore fan of gaming. You'd think that they were just like people would be saying, oh, I just play occasionally. No, we're finding that when it comes to players with disabilities, they are gamers first, and they use that as an identifier.
And I think it breaks down one of the stigmas that we have about people with disabilities, which is that they're not active. And this shows that there is activity through gameplay.
One of the other things we talked about was multiplayer. Again, gaming is really modern gaming, not gaming when I was a kid, is now a lot to do with the social aspects to it. When you look at the gross income of various titles, games that have a multiplayer piece to it, on average, make 30% more through the life of the game than a standalone game does.
We're seeing that a lot now in the current gaming space, where a lot of games have multiplayer components.
Because that keeps the game fresher, longer, and allows that social investment into it. Here on the screen, you'll see that we have an actual of how people play, and it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, because we realize that players with disabilities aren't playing by themselves. A lot of them are playing with other people. We have a huge portion, over 200 that are playing with their real life friends. Over 253 players in our panels interacting with online friends, which means that they're using games to connect with people who aren't, physically next to them. We have over 100 in a gilded play. And some of them are playing with strangers. So they're meeting people, they're socializing, and they're interacting through multiplayer gameplay.
And I would ask you guys, like, who in this room that we can only see one person plays online games?
Alright, so we have a hand of 1, 2, 3.
How many play more than one game?
Okay. We have 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
Wait, you have questions?
No, I was going to say, so if you play, how many of you go look for a friend and play the game that friend is playing, even if it's not necessarily the game you want to play? For example, for me, exactly, I see the one guy that I can see raise his hand. The reality is, Overwatch isn't my favorite game, but sometimes I want to hang with Craig and Steve, who are playing Overwatch, so I go jump rat it up all night, because I'm there not for the game, I'm there for the game with my friends.
Yeah. Steve and Craig may have to carry you because, if you're not playing Overwatch, I don't know, I'm not judging.
Craig carries the crowd out.
Craig is a carrier. He's really good at Overwatch. So we also conducted another study in conjunction with not only our player counts, but 70 PAX East attendees. So went to PAX East last year, not the one that just passed. I was there, but the study was done in 2018. Wow, that was a long time ago. And we asked players why gaming is important to them. So we came up with like 6 themes that both the player panels and or the PAX attendees were saying. One of the biggest themes we saw was connected. We saw that some of our players, particularly on the player panel side, were saying that they play games to socialize, just like what we were talking about a minute ago. On the PAX side, people said they play games because they create community. So we also found that players were playing as a diversion. So one of our players on the PAX side said that when I'm feeling anxious or nervous, I play video games for stress relief. On our player panel side, someone says it helps them wind down after a hard day of work. I think everyone listening can probably relate to that. Related to diversion, people are playing to simply escape. Games allowing people to travel to different worlds, and in that other worlds you can, jump into and experiment and try many different things and live different lives. We had someone at PAX say that games allow them to live different lives, and they'd never be able to experience that in the real world. We also have games as art. People are playing games as cultural enrichment, saying that games can be beautiful and touching or have clever stories, and that it gives them an outlet to express creativity. We also found that players were finding games to be beneficial, that they were enriching themselves through gameplay. Some players were using them to work on their problem-solving skills. Another player over on the player panel side said they started studying English when they were a child, and now I'm studying Japanese because of games. And lastly, and this is something that we found was more exclusive, mostly exclusive, and almost entirely exclusive to our player panels participant, and that's that games provided a level playing field. It enabled them. We were just talking about Overwatch. One of our players said that Overwatch is one of the first games that puts them on the same level as my able friends. Another person said that games are important because of my limited mobility. It allowed them to go places and do things that they couldn't do in reality.
So let's talk about what is the APX and what is game accessibility. So the current system, before APX came along, I barely say it's the current system anymore because we kind of rocked it so quickly it wasn't even funny, is hard to understand. It tells you what to do, but it doesn't really tell you how to do it. And it stifles creativity. And, there's a really awesome engineer, he works for the BBC named Doctor, James Knight, and he's there with his bear. This brilliant gentleman he's autistic, and he works in the industry, and he works every day, but he goes, I'm going to say something that's very unpopular. I think guidelines are a bad idea. They tell the answer without letting you know what the problem is. And this is core to why accessibility is always hard to really talk about, because all the information that's out there will tell you what you need to do, but it wouldn't tell you why you needed to do it, and therefore it became prescriptive and stifled creativity. And the last thing you ever want to tell a game maker to do is to stifle creativity.
Right. I mean, when it comes to game design, and you think about, guidelines, and it's not to say that guidelines are necessary. Like, I think of guidelines as sort of a shopping list, but the way they're used right now in games is, let's say I sent any one of you into a supermarket, and I said, pick out groceries that I need. Pick out groceries that I need for me to do whatever I want at my house. And when you got to the register, I handed you a list of the things that I needed, and I said, you get the things that I needed. You're going to be at the register not knowing why all the things on my list don't match with what you have. And it's largely because you didn't know what I needed. So now you have to run back, you have to be that annoying person pushing through the line, going back and telling everybody, hold on 1 second, I gotta go run back and grab some pasta sauce. So we created an accessible player experience so you can walk into your store with your shopping list, know what you need to do, pick and choose, and think about whether or not you need pasta sauce or you need some barbecue sauce.
I'm hungry now.
I am always hungry. That's why I use food analogies.
So one of the things we did is we asked 155 players on our panel, what are the top 5 accessibility options you look for in a game? And here is what they were looking for.
So at the top you see, or at the bottom rather, but at the top answer, you see that people wanted control personalization. So think about, control remapping, think about alternate control schemes, think about the ability to hold versus toggling with specific actions. We also see people wanted alternative channels. They wanted other ways to interpret the information they're providing. A great example of that, and a basic example of that, is subtitles. If your game is completely audio-based, you need subtitles so that people can actually perceive or take in the audio in case they can't hear. Other option categories we have are alternative inputs, such as different controllers. One example, the XAC, clear text. So maybe it's the ability to change the size of your text. Recoloring options, clear visual channels, clear audio channels, and UI personalization options, such as changing aspects of the HUD.
So you guys, they're making games, so there's this loop that you're trying to get gamers into. And a game that can't keep this loop moving are games that fail. Right now, we're going to talk about access options. Access options are my ability to get from whatever the platform I'm into the story you're trying to tell me. So menus, things like that. Player action, understanding the state of the game. This is your action loop.
Yeah, and anything that gets in the way of the player's ability to take action in your game, or their ability to understand the change in the game state, is called an access barrier. It is stopping them from interacting with your game and perceiving the information that your game is trying to send to them.
Did I say action? I meant access.
Yeah.
I meant access.
So
it's late for me. The next thing you have is challenge. And so we asked the questions around challenge, and it was performance options, skip options. Performance options are, for instance, like help me aim. The assist that we see oftentimes. Skip options. I can't do this quick time event. What you're asking is beyond my ability. Let me just skip it. Training options. This was a big one as well. Let me find a safe place to get good. The thing that I do all the time, because of Craig and Overwatch, is when I want to play, if I want to try to experiment with another character, they do a phenomenal job of giving me a training space to go try a diva before Craig makes fun of me for playing a diva. And progress options. giving me the ability to save the hard-fought progress I've made. This completes the player loop. And so this is the finished player loop that you're trying to create every time you're building a game. The player takes an action, the state of the game changes, understanding that new state, making the decision, taking the action, and continuing to go.
So this is sort of an alternate take on a typical player feedback loop that some of you might be, or most of you, all of you might be familiar with. Typically speaking, you only see player action and changing the game state and understanding that new state, and then cycles back into player action. But we found that when it came to challenge, that there was an aspect of decision making, there was an aspect of learning, there was an aspect of, okay, now that I have this new game state, what do I do next? Let me decide. Now, sometimes those decisions are snap decisions. Sometimes, you're playing a fighting game, you know to press square and triangle to punch and kick. But other times it could be, hey, do I want this armor for this particular boss fight? Because last time that boss actually demolished me. So there was an aspect to it that was sort of cognitive that came before you subsequently took another action.
So you're going to see that there are two loops here. And we're going to get to why there's two loops. The blue loop, the for loop, that's your action loop. Depending on where you are in your gameplay, you always have to keep action in mind. But as we go through the rest of this content, if you're in this space between understanding the state of the game and player action, then you need to focus on the patterns we're going to talk about around challenge. And this is really a key way of getting you to understand and focus on, as we get into this, into the APX system, where you are in this circle will really help you find where you need to be in the system. So together, this builds APX, Accessible Player Experiences. It is access with challenge together can create these accessible player experiences.
And if you notice that when you look at the APX triangle there, at the base level, there's access. You have to think about access first because your players can't, again, take that action in the game or understand the changes in the game state that those actions are creating, then they won't be able to interact with your game. At the base level, you have to think about access because if you're not giving your players access, there is no challenge because they're not playing your game.
So let's actually jump into this. Let's start with our access patterns. And this, guys, is really the key part of this entire presentation. Everything so far has been icing. Here comes the meat.
Oh, icing and meat, that's
and icing. It's gross.
Yeah, it's gross.
So here's the access patterns. I'm not going to read them all to you, but I just kind of want you guys to glance at them. We're going to go over two of them in depth so you can understand what a design pattern is and how we've implemented the patterns. So there are guidelines out there right now for accessibility that are 330 pages long. AbleGamers' own guideline we wrote back in 2010 is 47 pages long. I'm going to tell you that the APX patterns fit on 22 cards. It's 22 cards. And at the end, I'll show you where you can get your own deck of cards. So we're going to go over two patterns. The first pattern we're going to go over is second channel. So here's a pattern in its holistic form. Here's the problem. Players are unable or unreliably able to take in information via a particular modality and rely on that solely for that information. A real good example of this, something happened to your screen. Oh, it came back. A real good example of this that I always like to use was if I leveled in a game and it played a trumpeting sound, but I couldn't hear, how do I know I've leveled? So what's driving this pattern? And the drivers here are the keys to why the system works. Well, a player who is blind or has no vision may need alternative or enhancements to the visual information through audible or haptic feedback. So what if when I leveled, my controller also went zzz, zzz? Oh, I know something big has happened. Players who are deaf or of low hearing may need alternative or enhanced speech to non-speech sounds or visual and haptic. What if that same trumpeting sound also gave me a graphic swirly around me that said, or if those trumpets were played by little cherubs that appeared over me, I would have the sound and a visual. Or players who are just in noisy environments and need alternative information because they can't hear playing on the subway. You know, here's some great examples of game. Oh, so what's the design solution? Players can select additional channels of information via different modalities so they can be reliably take in that information. This is key to, you know, subtitles are in fact second channel to speech. But knowing that there's footsteps behind me, you need to give me some indication of that other than me hearing the footsteps. So let's look at some really great examples of games that are doing this right.
So in Madden, the kick meter has vibration indicators that allow you to basically feel when you can begin selecting where you want to kick, sort of the power levels of how you can kick, and the maximum level of power that you can use when you kick. All these vibration indicators sort of are used using single vibration, double vibration, followed by a third vibration. What these allow you to do is essentially you could be blind or have low vision and still kick the football through a goal. So it's not just visually based where you see the image of the meter there. You can also have that haptic feedback with the controller that Mark was talking about, where you can feel where or when is right for you to kick that ball. Over in Street Fighter 2, and this is something that multiple fighting games have done, including Killer Instinct, they map unique sounds to each individual movement. So if you're moving forward or moving back, there's a sound. There's a unique sound. If you're jumping, if you're firing a Hadouken, there's a unique sound mapped to that. There's a fighter, I call him a fighter. Every time I think about like esports players, I think of them as the actual fighters they play as. But there's an esports player by the name of Sightless Combat. He is blind. He is completely blind. He has had no sight in his entire life, and he plays Killer Instinct and other fighting games just by virtue of sound.
At a competitive level.
At a competitive level. Over on Fortnite Mobile, there are visual indicators for directional audio. So, again, thinking about that idea on the subway, if you're playing Fortnite Mobile on the subway, God bless your soul if you have internet service on the subway, but if you're playing Fortnite Mobile, there are indicators on the screen that tell you the things that are happening. There's some fire symbols if somebody's shooting near you. If there are footstep symbols if somebody's walking around you. You see on the screen that there's white sound to indicate when it's simply something not dangerous to you. But there's red visual indicators if it is something dangerous. For example, someone firing a gun or somebody building something near you. So they've given you a second way to interpret the things that are happening in the game. It's visual as opposed to just audio. Over in Diablo 3. Diablo 3 has multiple ways for you to perceive the audio that's being given for the character speaking. So not only is there subtitling, but there's a little name above the things that the person is saying, and there are also names over the character model so you know who you're talking to. So there are multiple ways for you to perceive and take in the information that's being sent your way. Over in Left 4 Dead 2, they have captioning for key ambient and environmental sounds. Now, this is really important because a lot of subtitling in games simply stick to when people are talking. But Left 4 Dead tells you when things that are impactful to the game are happening. For example, you need to know when a zombie's approaching you in Left 4 Dead 2. So you might see something on the screen that says zombies moaning. So you know there are zombies nearby. If a church bell rings in the game, you know a church bell is rung. You are aware of everything that's happening in the game from an audio standpoint because the subtitles or captioning provide you that information.
So the next pattern I want to talk to you about is same controls but different. This one's going to have a lot of obvious physical disabilities in it, but a player cannot effectively use the controls or configurations that you decided. So what are our drivers? Players with physical disabilities need to remap controls to alternate controls. They need to remap keyboard and mouse. They may need to remap because of reachability. A keyboard is quite big. Decrease repeats. This is a big one where maybe I can toggle on, toggle off. Reducing fatigue or strength required to activate. One of the things for this is you can actually program, for instance, the Elite controller trigger so that I barely touch it and it works. Avoid particular combinations of keys. Anyone know why Control-Alt-Delete was picked to lock your computer? Because the guy that invented it said no one would ever do that accidentally. And players with cognitive disabilities may just need an easier configuration so that they can remember everything. Players may just have a preference to controls that they're used to. What is the design solution? Players are able to remap controls in the game so that they can effectively create the interface that they need.
So over in Injustice 2, players can completely remap their controls. You see this is common in a lot of modern fighting games. But also, you can save up to 2 custom controller preferences that you can use later. Over in Nier Automata, you can actually change the direction of the joysticks or change the direction that the camera moves relative to the joystick. So something like inverting camera controls, horizontal versus vertical inversion options. Over in Splatoon, you could turn off motion controls because
thank God.
Motion controls are annoying to a lot of people, but they're fun for some. But for people with physical mobility issues, that can be problematic. Over in Mass Effect Andromeda, we talked about this earlier, being able to toggle whether or not you're holding or tapping a button to do something.
This one's done it really differently than any.
Yeah, and this is where APX, I think, is at its finest, where a developer can sort of use their own creativity. Overcooked has simple control designs, but it also allows you to map the controls to either side of any controller. So either the left side or the right side, or you can map the same controls to both sides. So you can split it across the whole controller, or you can have each side of your controller have a set of controls. That way, maybe you can put it flat down and 2 people can play on one controller at the same time.
So let's talk about challenge patterns. We look at access. Now people can actually make decisions around our game. Let's talk about now making the gameplay itself. So challenge patterns really fall around 4 different groups you're going to find. Performance, the ability to do the things that you want to do. Emotion, this is something that's new that I think a lot of you guys haven't thought about, but the emotional reaction, some people just can't handle strong emotional content. Cognitive, the ability to understand what I need to do, and decision making. So these are your 4 overarching themes you're going to see in the challenge patterns. So here's what challenge patterns look like. Bypass, house rules, training ground, moderation in all things, slow it down, undo, redo, save early, save often, total recall, helping hand, and play alongside. And just as a preview, we're going to go over 2 of them like we did in the other. So hang on. So let's talk about bypass. A player cannot successfully engage in part of the game even after all possible adjustments have been made. The drivers behind this. A player with a physical disability may need to be able to skip reflex or performance challenges in order to progress. A player with a cognitive disability may need to skip a decision-making challenge to progress. A player with a learning disability may need to skip a challenge involving large amounts of reading. Or a player may just want to skip because they don't care about your story. So what is the solution? Well, the player can skip what they want to. Let's look at some really great examples of this.
So over in Ratchet and Clank and a lot of games you see right now, you can skip a cutscene. You can press a button, you can skip a cutscene, and you can move on. Some people don't want the story. That may bother some people where you're trying to create a narrative that people can consume. But at the same time, you also want people to have the experiences that they want to have. They're paying for your game,
and they want to enjoy it the way they want to enjoy it. Spider-Man, skipping quick time events. This is a huge thing in the game.
They implemented this one so well.
Oh, they did it beautifully because, typically speaking in a game, if, you have quick time events, you can't get past that event, that's it for you. You're done. You're doing that over and over. In Spider-Man, they allow you to simply turn off quick time events, and the scenes where there are quick time events simply play as cutscenes. Over in Infernium, you could straight up turn off enemies in the game. They allow you to experience the narrative, the traversal, the horror elements, and the sort of the problem solving that's in that game with no enemies. Because for some people, going back to the idea of emotional content, maybe the enemies are a little bit scary. Maybe they're a little bit overwhelming for someone emotionally. Maybe from a challenge perspective, they can't get past those enemies. So Infernium allowed them to turn them off.
And this is where, you hear where people say, well, bypass, I want the game to be hard. But ultimately, as game makers, you guys are telling stories as well. And do you is a cutscene or a quick time event so important that you're willing to lock somebody out of the rest of the story? That seems silly to me, that would be a decision that you made. But because I don't have the capability of jumping from this box to that box to this box to that box, I don't get to know how the story ends?
Now, there's also another factor about it where you might be thinking, well, bypassing and skipping everything sort of is counterintuitive to what I want from my game. And that's where you have other patterns that you can implement. And Infernium does a great job of that. They've implemented the slow it down pattern. They allowed for slower foes. If you see underneath no enemies, there's an option to make the enemies in the game just slower. So more tutorials that are able to train the player and help them overcome the enemies they're inevitably going to face and having no permadeath.
Because ultimately you're creating games to sell games, and you've sold the game. Let them consume your story.
The wonderful thing about options are that they're optional. And I think that's what people seem to forget sometimes, where you can allow players to create their own experiences, but still have players who want to experience the game that you intended in the way that you intend. They can choose whether or not they want to go down that route.
So the next one I want to talk about is training ground. Players cannot gain skills to succeed in the game through the usual means of training used by the game. So our drivers for this are: a player with a physical disability needs to practice a skill or trial new controls. This one's big. I need to remap it. Give me a safe place to see if this remap works. Players with cognitive disabilities may need to practice skills longer just to gain competency. A player may need to practice for competency and mastery. They want to get good. They oftentimes want to get good, by the way, before they go into a multiplayer experience, like me. So what's the solution? Players can practice in a variety of ways on their own time so that they can gain the skills that they need. Let's look at some examples of this in action.
So over in Rocket League, you can jump into an exhibition mode in free play, and you can simply just try out everything that the game offers. You can play as long as you want. You can play with yourself, or you can play with bots, or you can even skew the amount of bots that you're playing with, and set the difficulty.
This game is actually so flexible with this that is one of the number one games that we use when we have a player with disabilities come into our center here to learn new controls. We use this game because this game is the most flexible when it comes to just, if we're talking for 10 minutes to somebody, the game just sits and waits.
Yeah. Over in Deus Ex Mankind Divided, they actually have a really clever tutorial system. So while you're playing the first level of the game, a prompt will pop up saying, hey, you're going to need to know stealth in this. You want to try that out? And if you press the button, it'll stay on the screen as long as you want. When you press the button, you can jump into a unique digital area that allows you to try the stealth techniques that they're teaching you. They'll take you step by step through how you should do it. And they allow you, this is really important, they allow you to repeat it as many times as you want before you jump back into the game world and continue your gameplay. And that's really important. Give players the opportunity to learn those skills in their own time.
So using the APX patterns, here's what the APX patterns are going to do is it's going to let you early design to generate new ideas. It's a holistic approach to accessibility that doesn't make you choose between players. You don't have to say, well, I only have time to do, like, do I want to help the deaf players or do I want to help the physically disabled players? Because APX allows you to move accessibility so far to the left, you don't have to make those choices. Examples on accessible.games will inspire you to do good gameplay, and it can sit alongside you as a design approach. It's designed to integrate into your system.
And as Mark said, when you head over to accessible.games, that's a website. It's accessible.games. The important thing I think to know about these design patterns is that they work together in unison. Is it a situation where you're trying to, this is not a guideline approach, where you're taking one pattern, that's the pattern that you're going to use for your game. This is the idea behind accessible player experiences, that these patterns have overlap. We kind of touched on that with Infernium, where Infernium had the ability for you to have no enemies, but it also gave you the option to slow it down. That's an example of the bypass pattern and the slow it down pattern, which we didn't talk about today, but the slow it down pattern working in unison for one game.
We do have decks. This is literally the APX system. They're available at ablegamers.org. They're $10 a deck. If you guys wanted to pool it together to save money, you actually get a discount as you order more, and you would save on shipping. So if you guys, as IDGA, if you guys decide you guys want some decks, this would be something you do. I'm going to tell you that these decks have been used, because I can say the studios Google is using them. Ubisoft has used them. Avalanche has them. Crystal Dynamics, Square Enix. We have been shipping these to just about every studio. Sorry? PlayStation has 44 decks. This system is working. It will work for you guys. We did announce at GDC, and I'll share with you guys, that we are creating a certified APX practitioner program. This is actually going to be a certification that AbleGamers will give you. It will teach you how to spot accessibility issues during design, how to find solutions for those issues as they arise, and how to win an argument with management that says that it's not important. So I thank you for your time. That's my dog, Lily Bean. She actually sits at AbleGamers almost every day with the team. And we can open up the floor for questions.
Sounds great. Thank you very much.
And for questions, I'm going to stop presenting, and you'll have to see us.
Yeah. Any questions in the room so far?
So for accessibility utilizing motion controls in VR, what are some things that you've found? Because the only thing that I've found is of notability is somehow Call of Duty 4 for the Wii. It has really good control customization. But
I think VR is something that is a conundrum for the whole entire industry, including us. That's actually something that we want to investigate as well. But you kind of gave the answer in what you said, right? The idea is for some players, motion controls are not an option. It's provide alternate ways for them to use VR, right? You can have a headset on, and there's even barriers there. But a lot of times, it's a situation where maybe there's an aide helping you put on a headset. If you put on the headset, you provide an alternate way for them to use controls that aren't motion-based, right? So maybe you allow them to attach an XAC. Maybe you allow them to use a standard PS4 controller or an equivalent. Something that allows them to not have to swing a sword if the game is asking you to swing a sword. If you play
those assists,
right?
You basically build those assists in.
You build those assists in. Falcon Age, for example, is a game that's playable on VR, but it's also compatible with standard PS4s, which means that you don't necessarily have to use the motion controls built into the game. You can just use a regular controller.
Here's a interesting question to kind of extend off of that. Since you talked about VR a little bit, there is a friend of ours that regularly comes to our location who is blind, and they said that they were really excited to get started with playing around with various different VR games. So any good ideas on that? Creating.
Nope. I mean, not games that are out. There are people that are, the VR space is everyone's still learning it. Mm-hmm. And so I think that the reality is we're trying to figure out the best way to address those. But, you guys are the engineers. You guys are the thinkers.
Right.
We're trying to give you tools, but you have to solve these problems.
And to that effect, I think that there are specific patterns that'll help you out with that, particularly on the access level. You definitely want to take a look at second channel, as we said, providing an alternate means for people to perceive the information. You definitely want to focus on clear channels. You definitely want to focus on flexible displays. Now, I know the name might make you think about screens, but for people who are blind, display is audio, right? Mm-hmm. That's the way that they are taking in information. Mm-hmm. You also want to think about the clear I think I said clear channels already, but I'll say it again, the clear channels pattern, which allows people to change the audio settings. Again, with audio settings, right? Let's say you have a main menu, but you don't have any way for players to know what sliders are changing. So maybe you need that menu to be voiced. Maybe you need that menu to have indicators that tell people, screen reader elements, for example, that tell people, hey, you are now changing the sound specifically for the environment. The sound is currently set to 1. You just changed it to 2. It's now at 3. And allow people to have these options available. And I tell people this all the time. A lot of these options are often available in your debug modes, right? When you're making a debug mode for a game, a lot of the times the plethora of options that we're asking people to include in the game are already there. It's just a matter of giving players access and obviously them not breaking the game when you give it to them.
Any other questions?
We
so
can
one
see
question.
somebody. Hi.
Oh, hello.
Hi.
One of the people passing around microphones to people. But I had a question. So, and you may have mentioned this, and I just may have missed it. But all those the statistics you had from the survey you had before, is that all information you have available on your website, or?
No, that's all secret information that you only get from this presentation.
Because I would definitely love to, be able to show like students of mine those slides and stuff like that, or
I'll tell you this. If you shoot an email to me or Mark, it's just Greg or Mark at AbleGamers.org. I have one thing that I can share that we are sharing that goes into some of the demographic information that we were talking about, such as like the breakdowns of our players, some of the options. Some of the stuff that they're using. Like assistive tech that they're using in particular, but just minor details talking about that. We have one study that we can share in that respect. That's just the basic demographic information on player panels. It actually doesn't go into individual options, but it does go into how these players identify themselves, some of the concepts of them using sort of assistive technology and things like that. That's shareable, but the other stuff is in the works and still trying to be published, so we can't share that. But if you were interested in that document, you can shoot me an email, and I can get that over to you. Just let me know where you're from. Okay. Because sometimes people just say, hi, I want this. And I'm like, I don't know you.
All right.
But I'd like to, if you let me.
Thank you.
Cool.
This is a really random question. Do you know of any accessibility related game jams out there? Are you aware of what game jams are?
I'm aware of what game jams are.
We're aware of what game jams are. There are, I don't know if they're necessarily focused on accessibility per se. I know that there's some out there, but obviously, that's something where there can be a lot more done in that respect. I think a lot of the ones that have to do with accessibility are local. I'm sorry I couldn't name any of them. Right. But the ones I have seen are like they're usually like, not like global game jam, basically. Something a little bit smaller than that. I wish I had more on that for you, but I don't, unfortunately.
I mean, I confess that we were planning on pulling together an relatively local accessibility game jam here as well. So
That's awesome.
yeah, definitely we'll keep you in contact once we get a few details sorted out.
Sure. I think the APX card decks will be a great resource for that. And I also think accessible.games is something that you maybe want to look at, because the cards, while the cards break down the design problems, the drivers and the solutions that some of which you saw today, accessible.games actually gives you examples of games that are doing it right now in the industry. Not only AAA games, but indie games as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there's sort of a way for you to get ideas that help you with that generative design process.
Cool.
Thank you.